Hello and welcome to Who Do You Love? In a society where independence is glorified but interdependence sustains us, we invite you to join us in reimagining freedom through relationship. Today, our guest is Kristen Kerr, and she is many things. And I will get to that intro in a second, but today we're going to explore the theme of sustainability. How can interdependence help us access freedom through sustainability? This came to me as I reflected on kind of the intersectionality around interdependence and sustainability, because when I was a kid, I grew up in Nebraska, where we had snow fairly regularly in the winters, but there was probably only like a handful of times that it snowed enough that you needed like a snowblower. And when I thought back to kind of how my neighborhood handled it, so we lived in a cul-de-sac, just a little circle, and my parents actually went in on the cost of a snowblower with my best friend's parents next door. And so there was only one snowblower in the whole cul-de-sac. But when it snowed enough to need it, our parents shared it. They took turns blowing neighbors' driveways clean. And I felt like this was just a beautiful, natural representation of the fact that we don't all need to own a snowblower for the few times that it snows enough to need one. And it both created like financial sustainability and physical freedom in terms of like we had more space in our garage. It meant that we could store the tables and chairs for parties, and they could borrow those when we borrowed the snowblower. So that's kind of where, yeah, that's the story that like comes to me. And I'm excited, Kristen, to hear more about the stories of your experiences, both personally and professionally.
But before we jump in, can I just add a story to that story? Like maybe there's something here that I think formed both of us from a young age. I also grew up in a cul-de-sac. And I was in, a beach town in Florida. And when we would have hurricanes, we would all lose power typically. However, the way that the cul-de-sac was set up was half of the cul-de-sac had access to the same grid as the school system and the fire department, which was where our house was. And so when power was restored, they would prioritize these critical facilities. And so thereby we also had power. And so in our cul-de-sac, my parents would run extension cords across to all the other households so they could get power. And then we would all come out together and cook all the food we had left so it didn't perish and get together. And I remember it being actually like I loved hurricanes because it always brought us all together as a little small community. So I think that's cool that we both kind of have these similar experiences and navigating natural impacts and also coming together with our neighborhood.
Oh, how cool. I didn't realize, I think you shared some of that with me before, but like what a perfect connection for today's conversation. So before we get too much further into stories, let me introduce you. So our guest today is the founder and director of Cultivate the Created, a nonprofit, and she is constantly identifying creative ways to upcycle waste to make art. She recently was exploring how to use vegetables to create watercolor, and I'll let her later share more about exactly what Cultivate the Creative does. She also, in her role as the CEO of Creating Resilient Solutions, she consults with communities and helps them write grants to support sustainability through clean energy solutions, tool rentals, and other projects. Also excited to hear more about those. Kristen is passionate about enjoying nature in all of its glory, having spent 9 months traveling across the country in her car to visit 22 national parks, bringing her total today to 35 national parks and counting. And she is one of my dearest friends, so of course Kristen volunteered to be one of my first guests. So Kristen, is there anything I left out, something that people might not know about you?
Well, I love that introduction. Thank you. I am still counting and looking forward to more national park visits. The next one I want to go to is Acadia up in Maine. But I think one thing I'll add is that you'll see with me today is one of my little companions, Dobby, and I have another pup named Coda, and they're my little life companions. And so they're with me often, and Dobby pretty much sits here all day with me. So he'll be joining us on today's call.
Amazing. An important role that you play in this life. So, as you all know, the title of this podcast is Who Do You Love? And that is not just a question, it is an organizing principle that I learned in my early years as a community organizer. And at the heart of it, it's really asking us, who are we willing to act on behalf of? So I always like to open by asking our guests, Kristen, who do you love? And how does that love show up in how you actually live?
You know, when I was kind of prepping for this podcast, I was really thinking about just my community of friends, honestly. And I know you're part of that community, Whitney, but I just really have been thinking about what these last few years have meant for me, especially trying to build and grow a mission that I feels near and dear to my heart. But also while navigating, you know, so many different ebbs and flows in my life. And I just feel like my friendships have meant the world to me. They've been there for me, you know, in the hardest of moments, to remind me and shine light to who I am when I don't see it. My friends have been bringing a lot of joy through quests and adventures that we take together, that we prioritize one another. And it's really just, I feel like this part of my life, I've just fostered this really beautiful community of people who I feel supported by and who I support as well and show up to one another in such an open way. And especially as I've been reflecting more recently around these last few years, building and growing a nonprofit organization, I've kind of stepped back and realized these last few days that everyone I've met in these last 5 years is because of the community I formed with my nonprofit. And so that was very much like an unintended like result or outcome that I didn't really expect at all. But I've met every single person through a shared love for creativity and art and community. And I look around me now and I'm just filled with these like incredible people who are just inspire me every day, push forward their creative dreams, um, you know, remind me of like the things that matter to me so I can create from that space as an artist as well in my own personal, you know, journey. And then with all of that, like love on the youth we serve and support. And I know we'll talk more about like systems and organizations later on, but it's because of these like beautiful people that I feel just, you know, inspired and encouraged to show up daily, and show up as I am, not my best self always, just show up as I am and just feel that love and support, and encouragement around me.
Yeah, as one of those lucky friends, I can absolutely attest to how you show up so well for our community. I actually, as I was preparing for this podcast, I thought about your Galentine's fundraiser that you just did and how that was such an example of you bringing together all of your loves. You know, it featured a clothing swap, so we were being sustainable in our consumerism. We were making Valentines for the kids at the foster home and your Engage Creativity program that you named. We were supporting a female small business where you hosted it at this coffee shop locally. And we were there just to celebrate these female friendships that you talked about. And so it was such a beautiful example of how you do community and how you truly do love on all of us. So tell me about something when you think about your personal experience that you've shared, borrowed, or given away that shifted how you think about ownership.
Ooh. Shared, borrowed, or given away.
Mm-hmm.
And the way you think about ownership.
Yeah. Kind of in the theme of sustainability.
You know, I think about like, you've heard me say this before. I say it all the time. Like, you don't know what you don't know until you know. And I think a lot of times, like, we actually have more access to resources around us than we really actually anticipate. And this is from more like I'm going to say more of a metaphorical state. Like we can talk about physical resources and how those get sustained in community and different initiatives, but I'm still here with the friendship theme, the friendship topic. And I think like something that uh, that's really been sticking with me lately and I've been reflecting on is like to really just assess what I know about myself, what I've learned, what experiences have shaped me, and how while I can still desire to learn and set goals for myself to adapt and continue to grow in my personal life, in my career, in my relationships, um, how do I really just leverage and draw on my actual just like wisdom gained through life's experience and through the ups and downs I've experienced through these growth cycles where I've learned something, unfortunately, 2 to 3 to 4 times over and over again, and not having to necessarily just feel that fear that comes from not knowing something and like embarking on like the next phase of life or education or whatnot, and just really leaning on my experiences and the experiences of the people around me that help shape, like that wisdom that comes from moving forward. And I think it's just built a kind of a trust. And I think like if we look at this on a bigger scale, like I think a lot of times we don't know how to build something and grow something like that is sustainable, over whether it's decades or even beyond our lifetime. But we really have to like in order to do that, we really have to see like what do we have available to us now. And we actually all personally have more strength and understanding and passion than we probably even give ourselves credit for, because like we all kind of have these walls up that I think that keep us from seeing our full potential. But really, when we like take that time to pause and reflect and see what we're working with, we actually have more than we think.
I hear you saying that a few things. One is like you yourself, when you're about to embark on doing something, you're not sustained only by your own wisdom, your own abilities, your own like what's within you. When you build community, you're also sustained by that shared wisdom, that the shared abilities, the shared passion, in a way that actually allows you to continue on or do something that can be sustained beyond your own capacity. And so I think that's really beautiful, a beautiful way to think about sustainability, because it is, I mean, I know that you and I have been going through it, and the idea of being, when we're tired, when we're crashing out, when we're needing help just continuing moving forward in whatever endeavor it is, it's not on just us. Like like you said, your volunteers are your friends. You sometimes don't even have needed to learn the lesson by having lived it yourself, because you've walked with friends through it and gained that wisdom to incorporate into your own things. And so I think that's a beautiful example.
I think too, like I think with like friendships in particular, like whether it's that person, like a direct friend I'm talking with, or their friends, like I think this is really special in particular within among women, because we are such community builders by nature. And I think like, if one of my friends doesn't necessarily connect with this scenario, they know they have a friend who knows that. And so they're passing on wisdom, and it's just like this collective wisdom that helps you navigate the situation you're currently in, and then on a collective scale and like looking at the nonprofit, like there's no way I could do all of this myself. Like it does take the skills and experiences of a collective to actually sustain something, like that. So we can get to that more later, but that's kind of how I've been reflecting on it.
Well, I mean, it's actually a great transition, because I'm curious, as you think about what you're describing that kind of starts at this interpersonal friend level, where does this show up at scale?
Yeah. So I feel like, when I initially set out to create my nonprofit, Cultivate the Creative, I I think like I always wanted to create a community resource that was like related to a cause I cared about. Kind of backtracking to my beginning of my career. I was young and had no idea what direction I wanted to go in. I just remember telling my advisor, I just want to help people. Um, and I have like lots of reasons for that now in hindsight. Like, I volunteered from a young age in many different community organizations. I just had a passion for supporting and bringing people together and being in community. But fast forward, like, I found personal healing through art and therapy, and it significantly changed the trajectory of my life. So I was like, you know what? This is something I want to support in a larger scale for young people who are navigating life. I wish there were skills and experiences that I had at a younger age when I was navigating my own dysfunctional family, not necessarily being in environments that always supported me, as I, was growing into adulthood. And so just like I wanted to create this resource. And in that, while I collected a lot of skills, and my background was public administration and policy, working in local governments, state governments, nonprofit organizations, I collected a lot of skills that could help me do the work, set up a nonprofit, get it going. But I learned that there are so many gaps that I just could not do alone. I mean, social media and we don't jive like most people kind of do, So I'm growing in that area, but I've had people who step in to offer that skill set and experience, people like you who have provided strategic guidance, like when I feel stuck, and reminding me of ways to rethink the approach that I'm taking. I've had, people with all these just different natural skill sets that show up and are like, you know what, I actually see the power of this mission. I too have had a healing experience through my own personal creative process. And I also want to be able to bring this forward, and especially, with vulnerable communities, especially youth and foster care. So it's like, all I had to do was like set it up. And then it was like the people came and the people built it. And I think back to like when I think of sustainability, like, and I'm sorry, this might be a side tangent, but like when I think of sustainability, I think of Antoni Gaudí over in Spain, who like created, what is it? Sagrada Família, I think.
And Sagrada Família, yeah.
Yes, thank you. And just these beautiful buildings, and that were all designed from a perspective of sustainability. And like that project in particular just finished like this year. And I mean, they started it, I think it was like 120 years ago. Like, don't quote me on that, but it's like, he started it and the people came and they built and they built and they built. And it's just like this magical experience. And that building, God forbid no incidents happen, but that's going to last centuries, and people are coming from all over the world to see it and to feel inspired by it. And it sustains itself because entry fees to all of these spaces that he's created fund and support arts for youth throughout their country. So I think like there's something to kind of, stepping up, creating the space, and the people will come and they'll actually be the ones to sustain it. And so my goal, even with this nonprofit, is to create a community resource that I think is necessary in Florida, where we see a huge increase compared to other states in, addiction, mental health disorders from a young age. We have a lot of school dropouts and youth who are disengaged, and that was my lived experience being born and raised here in Florida. And so I've seen some of these really just, hard experiences that people have. And I'm like, you know what, let's create something that empowers the next generation to move beyond it and feel that they have the skills and capabilities to continue to create change in their own world.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you, like those were a lot of beautiful examples, and the theme that I'm hearing you lift up, which I think is one of the hardest things, honestly, to do, is in terms of like ownership and like what you're giving away and what you're sharing, is this idea that you have this, like Gaudi offers up this vision for a building and how he sees the coming together of all these things. You're offering up this vision for, you know, a pathway for youth to build the skills that you didn't have as a child and that's needed in society. And then you're sharing it. You're allowing others to enter in. Sometimes you're even giving it away. Gaudi passed away and has given away this vision to others to implement. And the only way it's sustained is if it moves beyond the individual that initiated it, that held it. And it's so easy as founders for us to cling to and hold tightly to those ideas. I'm guilty of it myself, but you just lifted up some really incredible ways in which at scale we can, you know, let go of this idea of ownership of ideas, of platforms, of visions, of buildings, so that others can step in and help us sustain it. So,
well, because like we can't always see our blind spots. We can't always see like the areas that is actually hindering us from growth. And it really does require others to get involved, because things cannot be sustainable without us if they can't be sustainable with us trying to patch it and do it all on our own. You know, it does take a group effort to really make something that lasts and that's meaningful.
Yeah. I'm curious if you can identify anything that needs to be true systemically for that, what you've experienced and what you're doing and what you named, to even be possible. Like, is there something systemically that can support this idea of sustaining founders, sustaining ideas beyond the founder?
Yeah, I'm thinking of so many, but I definitely think like there needs to be, well, first off, just plain and simple, like the first thing is there needs to be funding and access to mental health care. Like, I just think that across the board, no matter if you have healthcare, if you don't have healthcare, you know, here in St. Pete, we have a program called The Hub where you can gain access to 15 free therapy sessions, and it's funded by the city for those who might not have insurance that covers, you know, mental health care. And a lot of them don't. My healthcare doesn't have access or support for mental health. So, you know, I think first funding, like if we're going to be a community that really that continues to think about resiliency and how we come back from disaster, whether that be natural disaster or just like the severs that happen from violence in our communities, like the only way we can do that is by really kind of reflecting inward first and finding the ways that we can sustain our own well-being before we can help others. So that's just like across the board. I'm going to always say mental health care access, but I do think like in terms of, yeah, I mean, systematically in terms of sustainability, like my worldview a lot right now is coming through grants. You know, I think you mentioned early on, in addition to my nonprofit, I write grants for local communities focused on sustainability and clean energy. And we saw a huge structural shift to grant funding at the change of administrations last year, where they were rolling back priority to invest funding in underserved communities where there are already increasingly larger barriers than any other communities in their region. We saw a rollback of the actually looking at hazards and risks in certain areas versus others. You know, that used to be a priority in the way that we structured our funding as a country, like making sure we're actually hitting the most vulnerable populations. And criteria for these grants, like, and these are things that people, you know, don't talk about. It's like the nuances of systems, right? Like systems are built on rules, regulations, and guidelines focused for how funding gets distributed, ultimately how we invest in our communities. And if we're not going to, as a collective, identify how we strengthen and support the most vulnerable communities, not only are we going to see those communities sink in our lifetime, which is really crazy to think about, we're going to watch devastation happen before our eyes, but we're also not going to be able to really build healthy communities when everyone's really responding on the aftermath of trauma rather than preventing and mitigating it up front.
So many gems, so many. And I What I think what's really coming through for me in this moment is just that, like, what you're naming is systemic, like the restricting of access to participation in sustainability. People who are critical to being a part of creating sustainability and sustainable communities who are losing access. We're going to dive a little bit more into that. Before we do, it's bringing up our second moment of reflection for you. I'm going to re-ask, who do you love that you've never met? And what is showing up for them ask of you?
Whitney, I got a big old heart, and this heart has so much love for so many people. Like I said, going back to that point when I was like a young 22-year-old, I was like, I just want to help people. I feel like, a lot of the experience that shaped me from a young age, volunteering with the special needs community, volunteering in nursing homes with aging populations, working on Habitat for Humanity projects, building homes for people experiencing like houselessness, and all these experience working at food banks. I mean, just really seeing like people who are experiencing these challenges that they can't overcome because they're not having the security and safety net that they need to sustain life. I've been in these positions in different ways, not directly connected to the way that the people that I worked alongside with during these different volunteer engagements, but I've also experienced different hardships in my own life too. And I think that's what really, like, without even knowing subconsciously at a young age, realizing what connected me to wanting to create these systems of support, these systems of community that help communities, respond proactively to trauma, ultimately. So I think, like, when I think about who I love, I love humanity. I love people. I have a particular interest, though, in youth and foster care. If I'm going to make this a more narrow answer, though, Cultivate the Creative, while we have creative programs broadly for the high school youth as well, we do have a program within the foster care system. And I love those kids so much. Like, they are just so sweet. They've experienced a lot of adversity, and they're just so resilient in the ways that they overcome these challenges from being abandoned, abused, neglected. And they really do, despite these challenges, continue to hold and preserve this light and continue to learn and grow and work together in a community setting, in a group home. And so, yeah, I'm going to go with foster youth. I love them.
Yeah. And I think that you see an extension of what you had to deal with as a youth in those kids. I'm curious what showing up for kids in the foster system asks of you.
I think there, first and foremost, openness. Openness to really seeing and learning to understand what they've gone through, as they're willing and open to share their experiences. I think kind of coming in from a non-judgmental perspective and just really giving them the space to be, whether that's really sad one day, or they're missing their parents another day, or they're just like really excited because we're doing clay. I think it's really taught me to just kind of step back from all the things going on in my own mind and just be present with a young person so they can just be.
Having observed you over the last few years, more than observed, but I think it seems to me that you've also had to confront a lot of your own, walk through your own mental health journey, and to be able to show up in those ways, to be present with those youth, to be patient and understanding and non-judgmental, and honestly to develop these programs, right? Your own journey has allowed you to identify what maybe was missing for these young kids in a way that it helps you. I know you talk about not knowing strategy, but you have a very clear, this is the program that's needed for this group, this is a program that's needed for this group, and I think that you couldn't have done that if you hadn't done the hard work that showing up for kids without, those tools asks of you.
Yeah, I think too, like the biggest thing I've had to learn through all of this is not also to sacrifice. Like, there's one thing to like be present when you're in the moment with the kids, but there's also another like kind of more like zooming out, more big picture. Like, I can't do any of this work if I'm not taking care of my own self, if I'm not establishing boundaries that preserve my own energy, my time, my own financial resources. Like, and this is a big lesson of this season in my life, is, I really do want Cultivate the Creative to be something sustainable without me. And I have reached burnout many times through this journey. Nonprofits, the way that they're structurally designed, make it really challenging to sustain. It really is kind of having to build momentum, support, and people who see that shared mission for it to last that long, for it to have a great need that other communities can get on board with too. But it can't be at the sacrifice of oneself. Everyone has to take care of themselves in these communities.
Yes. Yeah, and you, just before we kind of went to that who do you love question again, you started to talk a little bit about the other communities that you're supporting and nonprofits that you're supporting. You've been doing a lot of work connecting community organizations to Department of Energy funding opportunities focused on clean energy, renewable technologies, thinking about our shared natural resources. So I'm curious to hear a little bit more about what showing up for those communities requires of you. And I have another question, but I'll pause there to see if there's anything you want to share about that.
Yeah. These last year and a half, I've been supporting communities across the state of Washington with applying to federal grant applications. And it's been such a unique experience. One, I'm working with folks in a state that actually prioritize sustainability, resiliency, clean energy. So, they are empowered by their state essentially to get creative, be innovative, and maximize funding to create like infrastructure that's going to support through disaster, through decades of change. It's just really cool to see at a larger scale what that could look like, and then seeing like these small organizations who are impacted. I'm working with really tiny nonprofits. I'm working with tribal communities, which has been, and I would love to expand on that because they have guided a lot of my thinking in this last year and a half on a personal, a nonprofit, and kind of global viewpoint. And then I've been working with, communities who are just trying to surely preserve their infrastructure because, with these impacts of climate change, like they are feeling the repercussions and the challenges that come from natural disaster. And so, and then also funding, like federal funding is a huge investment to allow communities to really strengthen their infrastructure, but expand their capacity to deliver and make the work that they're doing sustainable. So it is a huge investment, and it's really daunting for a lot of people, but we can help remove like some of those fears and take their hand and walk them every step of the way so they can actually secure funding that like makes a huge change in their community, which is so cool.
This feels like a meta conversation around sustainability because it's like the sustainability for organizations to do sustainability projects. Like there's been so many like versions of sustainability in this conversation.
So true.
What have you learned from, you said specifically working with the tribal communities has really shaped your ideas when you think about like what could it look like if this idea of like ownership, consumption, just existing were redesigned around more of a sharing, regenerative, interdependent society?
I feel like tribes do this best. Like it is embedded in most cultures. Obviously, every tribe is different. Every tribe has their own culture. They have their own history. They have blended histories with other tribes in the area and the region. But one thing that I love first and foremost is that um, tribes are really dedicated to like preserving natural resources and only utilizing them to the extent that it's going to continue to strengthen their community. And so they're very intentional about the development and the work that they're going to be doing. Um, they also take a lot of pride in tribal sovereignty, where especially over energy and electricity, so they can not necessarily have to um, rely on, you know, uh, like local communities that have private developers who come in and do all these projects that kind of deplete natural resources in the area. And so and then it also helps them like reduce the cost and burden that's on their tribal members. And so they think about this like very comprehensively in terms from like an infrastructure perspective. Um, but then also like in that sovereignty, they also are working with each other. So like in order for them to like learn how to gain tribal sovereignty, they're teaching one another. They have like public works crews coming in from other tribes who have already figured it out. And they offer free support and services to one another, which is really beautiful because ultimately like their culture is built upon interdependence. Everything they do. I mean, a lot of these tribes are slowly but surely like dying out, right? Like there's some tribes I work with that there's only 800 people left. Maybe of that 800, only 1 to 2 learned the native language, and they're like in their 70s. So they're trying to restore and preserve their culture, their language, their stories that kind of shaped, their way of being. And they invest so much in the younger people, whether that's through just like preserving culture, language, resources, art, or even creating workforce programs. So if they are going to build their own, sovereign energy system, that they have like people who have jobs to grow into, that they have work that they can learn how to actually sustain that infrastructure over time. And then the last thing too is they have such a reverence for their aging populations as well. They really do lean on the wisdom of tribal members, who have gone through all these experiences and are still holding on to these stories. And like, we might have a meeting scheduled and they might not show up. And that's because one of the elders came for a cup of coffee and then the whole day was just a 4-hour cup of coffee. And like, I love that. Like, I want that. They'll cancel a whole day of work for the local basketball team game, like they care about community, and they make it their priority rather than just making money, sustaining infrastructure, doing all these things to keep it running. Those things are all important, but like they know that first and foremost, coming together as a group is necessary as a way of being. And that then trickles to every decision that they make as they have reverence and preserve their natural resources around them. So I could go on and on, but that's
it's beautiful. The thing it was making me think about as you were talking was this sustainability being about recognizing what is needed and only taking what is needed, like this rejection of overconsumption. Like,
yes,
I don't need all day to finish this project. I can give 4 hours of my time with this elder because it matters. I don't need to make, X amount of dollars because I can sustain my family with this much. And so that means I can save this time for community and relationship. And braiding sweetgrass, I know we've talked about it, but is a book that when you were talking about that practice, it reminded me of one of the stories in there, which is simply that when someone goes to collect sweetgrass to braid and weave their baskets, there might be a whole field of sweetgrass, but instead of cutting all of the sweetgrass near them, they cut just enough to make their basket and leave the rest for whoever might come behind them and need sweetgrass for their baskets. It was also rooted in tribal wisdom. And so I just think that that's a beautiful example of, interdependence, sustainability, thinking about consumption. So
well, and if you think about like nature, I mean, that's just like how like ecosystems continue to thrive and exist is that, like, you know, many animals that like hibernate in the winter, they only eat what they need. They take what they need to sustain them during these cold months, like, the bees are only taking what they need to be able to pollinate like this little maybe garden bed or like, that one little area. Like, um, yeah, like this excessive consumerism that's happening globally and looking at like the long scale of humanity as far as we know and have documented it, like it's just burning our resources too quickly for things to just land up in a landfill. And if anybody here is what's watching has never visited a landfill and done a tour of a landfill, I think everybody should be required as a citizen to go visit a landfill because it is shocking the amount of just shit that's dumped there to just live out its useful life. I mean, it just blows my mind. Anyways.
No, I'm so glad you brought this up because I yesterday was like, came across an article that said essentially that the thrifting like market has gone from like, I think it was like a $19 million business to they're projecting it to be like 70 million by 2029.
Whoa.
That like there's a trend towards this, thrifting. There's also, we're seeing a lot more rental and subscription over ownership. So yeah, I think that there have been some individual changes towards or against overconsumption.
Totally. I think thrifting is like the ultimate. And also, let's be real, like all these trends are going to repurpose themselves every 20 years, right? Like I think we're now starting to finally like go back to the early 2000s, which I vibe with, but like, it's like those clothes are still out here. Like, you can find them more likely here than you will just making more. But yeah, like, yeah, thrifting is, I think like younger generations also are like culturally not just accepting it, but like also prioritizing it too, and even at the upscale level too, like there are a lot of, apps, Poshmark and others that like allow you to even purchase upscale items for events that you may have not considered because you just wanted to go to the mall, whatever. It's just very different, the younger generation than even our generation growing up, where it was like really excited just to go to the mall for school prep, and everything. Whereas like now it's like, no, like what can you find? What gems can you pull out at the thrift shop? So I love it. I'm here for it.
Me too. Me too. Some of the pushback that I think I hear often around, this idea of interdependence for sustainability is, thinking back to our early stories around our parents sharing, their grid, their food, their snowblower, or even at a macro level, this idea of depending on other countries for our oil, for our, potatoes, whatever it might be, is that ownership ensures that it's available to me when I need it. I don't have to worry if someone else is currently using it or if I have to ask, heaven forbid, I have to have a conversation with someone about like negotiating who's going to use it when or asking for something back that was borrowed. But this idea that, ownership means I know I have what I need when I need it.
Oh.
Interdependence around sustainable shared resources might require more patience, inconvenience. Yeah. Any thoughts on things, something you would say to someone who's kind of got that as a like, what if it snows today and my snowblower got broke when the neighbor used it last?
I mean, we live in such an independent culture where, like the slightest things inconvenience us these days. I honestly like, I have very little tolerance for it. I just like, I think that, sure, if you want to, have constant access to the things you need, that is totally fine. Like, I get it. Like, I get that everybody's coming from different levels of financial comfort that they are able to do that. And even if you remove the financial piece, though, like, it's just really missing out on opportunities to connect with one another. And I think that, you know, when I see people who kind of have this perspective, there's definitely something missing. You know, I definitely see like like, you know, like the more you cut people out of your life because of these, like community is going to require inconvenience no matter what. But like, if you cut people out of your life, like, then what's going to happen when you do need to support yourself? You know, like, and whether that's something as practical as like not wanting to ask a neighbor for a snowblower, like, well, what's going to happen then? Like, you know, like if you are isolated because of a disaster, like, are you going to be able to lean on your neighbor too? Like, I just think that like inconvenience is the price you pay in order to foster relationships that are meaningful in life. And in the end of the day, we're just passing through this world, you know, like, you know, even though it's this long life, it's like a really short blip. And it's like we can gain all of these access to all these different resources and whatnot. But in the end, like the thing that sustains us, in my belief, is the relationships that we build.
Obviously, I agree. I think,
but I don't know, like if that's like a case to make against somebody who's like firmly like, I want to have my own snowblower, you know?
sure. I also wonder though about something you kind of alluded to earlier around who we are cutting out of access and why we tend to, you know, thinking about our neighbors. Like, I know there are certain neighbors that I haven't made an effort to get to know. There's something about them that either seems off putting or like it'd be too much to be in relationship or, you know, for whatever reason, I have not really engaged beyond the wave as I walk down the street. And I know that extends obviously to our world in terms of whole countries that we choose not to, you know, do we choose to write off? So for sustainability to be real, not just for some of us who have this mindset, but structurally, who do you think we are currently leaving out of the equation and what would it cost us to include them?
You're hitting me with some deep questions today, Whitney. Um, God, it's very broad. Um, where I keep going, where my mind keeps going is like, yeah, like you can be a good neighbor, and let's like keep it at the like localized level first. Like you could be a good neighbor, but still not want to connect with other neighbors, right? Like I'm not saying that by showing up to community, it's access to everyone. I think it's learning like who are the right people that you want to surround yourself with. Where's there reciprocity in the way that fills you? That's not going to be the same for everyone. Everybody has different needs, different people they kind of connect with, different interests. And I think that's okay. I think that that's important actually is I'm saying everybody deserves community. Not everybody deserves everyone as community. But I think it's finding your community. Now, at a global level, though, like I think, oh, I don't know, this could go in so many different paths talking about this. I think your question was who's left from the table.
I mean, we can stay at the neighbor level around like who are we currently leaving out of the equation and what would it cost us to include them? Because I hear and understand you on the like everyone deserves community, not everyone deserves everyone's community. I wonder if that also allows us, if I'm thinking of people experiencing homelessness, how often is it pretty common that most of us are not engaging frequently with kindness, with generosity, with inclusion towards people experiencing homelessness? Does this idea of, well, somebody will include them in community, it doesn't have to be me, kind of let us off the hook in terms of, you know, leaving people out of the equation and what it would cost us to include them? Because what it would cost us is discomfort or patience or finances, you know, like what And obviously I agree with you in terms of there are ways in which relationships can be, forgiven, but it doesn't mean that the boundaries, obviously there are reasons that boundaries exist. People on a broader scale would talk about there's a reason why borders exist. So just kind of exploring who are we leaving out that maybe isn't intentional, and what would it cost us to include them.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of pockets of society that aren't acknowledged even just as basic human beings, like to your point, maybe somebody experiencing homelessness that you walk past. Um, I do think, I mean, this is like a value system I hold, and I don't think it's shared by others, but I do think that everybody has a small way of being able to support, like whether that is, giving financially a little bit, or maybe like having leftover food that's willing to offer, or just sitting down. Like, I met a woman last year who I could hear she was in distress. So I went up and talked to her. And yeah, in the past, I would have never known what to do. I was like, how, this person's clearly in distress. I don't know if I have it in me to support the way she needs, but I also haven't heard her out and seen what she needs. She couldn't read her screen. She was in a very stressful situation and trying to contact somebody who's going to come help her. And she's been sleeping on the street for 3 days. And she was trying to connect to the person who's going to come pick her up from Pasco County. And she just couldn't see her screen. It wasn't complicated. I just sat down with her, helped her read her phone screen. In the end, she had the suitcase, and I was like, oh, I have clothes in the car. I was about to go take to Goodwill. Do you want to look through them? She was like, yeah. So then she went shopping through my stuff. And then, one thing led to another. The person came and picked her up. I hope she's well. I think that that was like, obviously like more than most people will feel comfortable doing. But I think the thing is so many people are afraid, I think, not more of like not being able to want to help because they have no desire. I think people are more afraid because they don't know how to help. And in all reality, it's like as people, as human beings, and I can acknowledge that there are sometimes people who might not be present, maybe due to mental health or addiction or something. But other than that, like, we're all human beings, and we all long for connection one way or another. So even if it's just like literally sitting with somebody or acknowledging somebody as a human being and acknowledging their humanity, I think that goes way further than I think we oftentimes imagine that it could. I do think that like these small acts of kindness can sustain community and help somebody from having a really shit day to actually maybe shift their perspective and see it in a different way and identify what they need. I know people are afraid that they don't have not only their own resources to share, but resources to connect into community resources. Like I don't think that everybody should be responsible of knowing all of that, but I do think everyone has the ability to offer simple kindness and respect to one another and acknowledging our humanity.
Those are, beautiful words in terms of like that interpersonal, creating the interdependence that's necessary. What about what you're observing through your consulting work in terms of structurally, when we think about sustainability and the conversations around making sustainability a real thing, who's getting left out? Who are you seeing that are having, challenges getting access to funding to make their sustainability ideas happen? Who are you seeing left out of decision-making tables about what gets funded, and why do you think that is? What does it cost us to include those groups?
I think that there's a lot of people being left out right now. I think there are communities on the verge of extinction that are not getting the support they need due to look at New Orleans, for example. New Orleans is going underwater, and we may literally see it go underwater in our lifetime. I know they've invested a lot in resiliency, but not near as enough as the infrastructure they need to sustain like flooding events. I think that there's a lot of coastal communities that are not getting the investments that they need because investments are going elsewhere right now in our country. I think, from like a big picture, like where our financial resources are going to are like Homeland Security and Department of Defense, which obviously like protection is necessary and important to have a safe and thriving community. However, that community, if it can't actually exist because of natural impacts, then what's it for? And then two, I think that you know, I think also too with a lot of these structural changes and how the grants are designed, community engagement used to be really critical, making sure that you're not only dedicating your resources to underserved communities of persistent poverty, um, but now like not only is that not a focus, but there also isn't like all these requirements to actually engage the community to make sure that their needs are being heard and the solutions that are being designed. Like it's one thing to know that there's a solution that's needed to ensure that, a little neighborhood doesn't flood out from a hurricane. But it's another to actually not really like hear from those people about how that project actually is going to impact their day-to-day living in between those very rare disaster situations. So I think a lot of vulnerable communities are not being heard right now. Even like kind of on a middle ground level, we work with foster youth, and there's a lot of protections against, like exposing their identity, right? So like we can't take photos of the youth that we're supporting, which really make it hard from like a mission. Like we want to advocate and provide more resources to youth, but a lot of times people aren't connecting necessarily with a newsletter as they would with these like real photos of change that demonstrate change. And so like they're like this hidden population within society that like doesn't get the actual support that like I think that most people would say. Like I think this is a bipartisan issue. Like let's get youth who do not have families support and resources so they can, grow to be, really strong, resilient adults. Like, like I think everyone would agree that's important. But once again, because some of these things are necessary, they get missed in like the big conversations that are happening. I don't know. Those are just my initial thoughts. I hope I answered that.
Yeah, fabulously. I mean, I think that you're so right. There's like these hidden populations because of some of the rules that are made to protect folks, including tribal sovereignty. Sometimes that means accessing and including. I know when we were doing work out in California to interview families and caregivers around the foster care system, child welfare, that it was harder to engage tribal communities because they had their own separate entities and governing bodies, and again, created out of a positive intent. It does require of us more effort, more community engagement, which is no longer being funded or prioritized. Sometimes we're required to do it quickly, and when you have to find these groups, identify, connect with them. By the time you're finally in conversation with them, the project is over. So yeah, I think that's a great example of how and why a lot of these groups are being, if there's only 800 people to engage, to find those people and to build relationship, it takes more time, effort, patience, funding, and that's often where people are getting cut. So
it always takes time. It always takes time. And to your point too, the time is necessary to build trust, because a lot of communities who are preserving and kind of living differently than, the average community, it's because they have experienced, racism. They've experienced resources being depleted like right in front of them, people coming in and taking over their land. They've experienced all these extraction, like all these things they've experienced. So like why would they just walk in and start trusting a consultant who got hired to do a project in this 3 to 6 month turnaround? Like what incentive do they have other than like, we'll hear your needs and hopefully it creates the structural changes you need? Like, I think it's also why it's really important too. And I feel silly saying this as somebody who lives in Florida but supports communities in Washington. But I do think that like you have to have like people who actually genuinely care about that local community and environment to really help start building trust. Like it takes local leaders to step up. And even though I'm able to, that kind of work allows for me to be, states away and support it because it's really just grant writing. Like I think in terms of actual making change, it requires everyone locally stepping up in their own community and finding a way that they can get involved. And that doesn't have to be creating a whole nonprofit. And I highly recommend that everyone don't just go out and create their own nonprofit. If you want to talk to me I'll send you my information. But like,
I'll discourage you from doing that.
I'll give you all the things to think about and consider. Like, you know, if it's a good idea, Leah, let's push it forward. But anyways, all that to say, like, I think like everyone can step up in some way locally, and that's how we build collective trust. And that's the reason why, like, even though I'm about ready to move out of Florida to get out of this heat, because like I get why entire civilizations leave, you know,
because we live in Dante's Inferno.
Because we live in the Inferno out here. It's so hot. Even though I feel that way, like it's still my home. It's still the place that I care about. And I feel like I have a unique perspective on the way that people live and exist and grow up in Florida. And let me tell you, we are surrounded by a bunch of Florida men, like, and women. And it's crazy. It's its own version of like being in the wild down here. And like, if you don't have that perspective and you're kind of trying to come in and change it and give them the solution that you do up in New York, that ain't gonna work down here, baby. Like, it's not. Like,
do you wrestle alligators in New York? No.
Yeah, like, do you know how to navigate? Say, do you have manatees flip you over in your bayou? No. So, like, you know,
real life
like
experience, folks.
Yeah, this last week a manatee flipped me over. Like, so it's like you do need people who are familiar and know the culture and what you're working with, and that's how change is made. So, like, if anybody's listening today and you're just like, I don't know how to get involved, pick a topic you care about, find a nonprofit doing it, and become a volunteer, because that actually is what sustains those nonprofits. And it's like you will have something to offer, even if you don't think you do, because everybody has something to offer to this collective experience. So just step up, even if it's just an hour a month, do it. I totally like double dog dare you.
Way to just answer my question without asking it. We are now making things concrete. I think that's a great suggestion. If someone listening wants to get involved, take a step towards sustainability and interdependence. I also think something as simple as thinking about like the next time you need or want something that you don't have, first asking a friend, can I borrow it? Take a scan on Facebook Marketplace or your local thrift store to see if you can get it secondhand, or if you have to buy it, like find a couple of people who might go in on it with you. So,
you know, Whitney, somehow in the last month, I've acquired 3 leaf blowers from all my neighbors. Like, I know, it's like, I didn't even know this was the need I had, and I do. And I don't know if they're trying to tell me something about like how I do my yard work, which is fair. But like, you know, they all offered, and they're like, well, you know, we have these other things that we're using, and this is a tool that I know you said you needed. And it's like, if I hadn't expressed it or just literally like sat outside and just chatted with my neighbors every now and then in passing, like, I don't think I would have had these leaf blowers, you know? So yeah, I think like, just like learn to be uncomfortable or be comfortable in the like small discomforts that come with like making connection with other people. And I think it's weirdly like this daunting task of our new generation that people like are afraid of. But really, in the end of the day, I think like people naturally open up if you're the one to step out of your own comfort zone and do it. And I think like travel teaches us that too. Like, you don't have to even speak the same language as someone to make a connection with someone. Like, you know, you don't have to like, it's not really that rocket science. It's just like learning to make small connections is like the starting point.
That is a beautiful way to close, and a beautiful transition into our closing question. So I will ask you one last time. Kristen, who do you love, and how has loving them made you more free?
It's my community. I love my community. I love the community that I've cultivated, you know, and because of the people that now have entered my life, because of taking a courageous chance of creating a community resource, I'm surrounded by people who allow me to authentically show up without reservation or hesitation, who allow me just to be and exist, to figure out all of the hard things to navigate through life, because they just truly celebrate who I am as a person and give me that freedom to explore life from so many different perspectives. And because of that, I'm better for it.
That is beautiful.
Including you, Whitney.
Well, I'm very fortunate to be a part of that community. I can attest to that. Well, thank you, Kristen, for being with us today and for being my first podcast guest. So
I'm so excited to hear more and hear who people love throughout this journey and everyone's angle and approach. There's so many perspectives, and the perspectives of the collective will change the world. And for those, if it's okay just to insert this, but for those who are
Please.
local to the St. Pete area, if you are wanting to get involved, we're always looking for volunteers at Cultivate the Creative, whether you're a local artist or you just want to hang out with kids while they do art. Come join us.
So where can they, if our guests listened and are like, I want to be her best friend, I want to be part of her community, I want to support what she's doing, where can they find you?
You can find me at Cultivate the Creative on Instagram and Facebook. And then our website is cultivatethecreative.org, where all of our volunteer information is at. And if you want to email us, it's connect@cultivatethecreative.org.
What a wonderful conversation that was. I think the thing that's still sitting with me is just how sustainability, usually when we use that word, people think about environmental sustainability. But in this conversation, we talked about sustainability of self and the ability to share wisdom and lean on capabilities and strengths of others to sustain self. There was this idea of sustaining big ideas and visions and how that requires community to carry those visions and ideas on beyond that one individual who may have been the seed planter. We talked about sustainability of whole communities who may be dying out. We talked about sustainability in the sense of shared natural resources, shared resources as simple as a piece of clothing or a snowblower. And we talked about that interdependence required from the very small individual level all the way to global. And I think that's the question that is still sitting with me, is this idea of boundaries and borders, and that they exist and can be helpful and protective and healthy when applied surgically. Yet too often we use them as ways to leave out whole people, especially when what it costs us is time, effort, discomfort, inconvenience. And that was the thing Kristen really hit home, this idea that being in community will require inconvenience. But ultimately, it's the community that sustains us. So, I will see you next time. But in the meantime, who do you love?